Good evening, and welcome to Late Night Science, where the universe slows down enough for us to listen, where thought drifts like light through fog, and even the heaviest questions become soft enough to hold. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey through one of the most intimate mysteries any mind can face. Death stands as the only universal human experience that no living person has ever truly experienced. It is the border we can see but never cross and return. The thought that ends all thinking. The silence that defines the sound of being alive. Every culture has tried to describe it, explain it, even conquer it. Yet the mystery remains, vast and patient. Before we begin, take a moment to breathe. Notice where you are, the room around you, the faint hum of life, still moving. Maybe you are listening from a city that never sleeps, or from a quiet room where the night has already folded around you. Wherever you are part of this shared stillness. Tell us softly in the comments below where you drift from tonight, which corner of the world you let this quiet find you in. And as we wander through this cosmic calm together, remember to rest a little longer with us. Like, subscribe, and thank you to those already here, returning each night to float through thought and starlight. You are the reason this quiet keeps expanding. Now, let us begin. There is a silence beneath every sound, a stillness older than stars, older than breath. It waits beneath the ticking of clocks, beneath the beating of your heart. That silence is not empty. It is the shape of everything that ends and everything that begins again. To speak of death is to walk to the edge of knowing. It is the one phenomenon we can never stand outside of to observe. We know it with certainty, yet never from within. Every philosophy, every religion, every science meets this paradox and bows to it. Death defines life not by opposition, but by completion. As darkness defines light, as silence defines song. In the hush of the universe, we are reminded that our entire existence is a temporary wave rising out of this still ocean. When that wave falls back, the ocean does not mourn. It receives what was always its own. The atoms of your body have died and reassembled countless times already. Every breath you take contains traces of what once was flame and forest and star. Death, in its quiet way, has always been the artist of renewal, and yet we resist it. We speak of defying death, fighting it, conquering it. But perhaps death is not an enemy waiting beyond the light. Perhaps it is the very stillness that gives light its meaning. In scientific terms, life is a temporary imbalance, a small, exquisite rebellion against entropy. Every heartbeat is energy borrowed from the universe, promised to be returned. Think of what that means. Every cell in you carries the memory of stars that burned out long before Earth ever cooled. Their ashes condensed, formed planets, and eventually, you. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the oxygen you breathe, all are gifts of stellar death. Without death, there would be no chemistry, no biology, no consciousness to wonder at all. The universe, it seems, was never afraid of endings. It uses them as doors. Still for us, beings capable of reflection, death feels like contradiction itself. We can imagine it but not inhabit it. We can stand before it but never inside it. How can we understand something that ends the very understanding we rely on? This is the oldest philosophical question, older than writing, older than language itself. When ancient thinkers first contemplated mortality, they saw both terror and grace. Epicurus, calm and rational, told his students not to fear. When we exist, death is not. When death is, we are not. He believed death could not harm us because it never meets us. But others looked at the same silence and saw loss. The loss of love, of laughter, of possibility. Both are true, perhaps. Death is both absence and transformation. A paradox so complete it mirrors the nature of the universe itself. Imagine time as a vast river. You are not floating above it. You are a current within it. Life moves forward, moment by moment, dissolving behind you into memory. Death is not a wall at the river's end. It is the moment the current rejoins the sea. The flow does not stop. It simply changes form. Scientists can describe the biological moment of death, the slowing pulse, the cascade of chemical release, the stilling of neurons. But what happens to the experience itself, the consciousness that perceives? Here, science grows quiet. There are theories, models, metaphors, but no data can pass through that gate and return. Philosophy steps in where measurement falls silent. It reminds us that perhaps the point is not to solve death, but to understand what its presence means for life. Knowing that our time is limited changes everything. It makes love urgent. It makes kindness meaningful. It gives each sunrise a fragile brilliance it would not have if it lasted forever. Death is not the opposite of life. It is the quiet condition that allows life to matter. And perhaps that is what this first chapter truly asks us to feel. Not fear, not despair, but recognition. That the stillness we approach is the same stillness that once gave us form. The same silence that holds every heartbeat, every thought, every breath. So as you lie there listening, maybe half awake, maybe somewhere between thought and dream, imagine the universe breathing with you. Imagine every living thing as part of one vast inhalation, one slow exhalation across eternity. Life is the breath in, death is the breath out. The cycle continues, perfectly balanced, infinitely gentle. And in that rhythm, you are safe. You belong. You are part of the silence that underlies all sound. When we return in the next chapter, we will walk further into this question, exploring how the ancients tried to reason with death, how logic itself met its softest boundary. But for now, let the thought dissolve, let it rest. The silence we all approach is not waiting to take something from you. It is waiting to remind you of where you have always been, within it. There is a kind of comfort that arrives not from faith but from logic, the kind that does not promise paradise, only peace. In the soft twilight of ancient Greece, a man named Epicurus tried to teach such comfort. He sat in gardens rather than temples, spoke to friends rather than followers, and offered not salvation, but serenity. His words were quiet, measured, and still. A philosophy built for hearts that feared the end of all things. Epicurus believed that death, the shadow haunting every human thought, was in truth nothing at all, not something to be conquered, nor worshipped, nor even feared, but a silence that could never touch us, because when it arrived, we would no longer be there to meet it. When we are, he wrote, death is not. When death is, we are not. The two never coexist, and what never coexists can never collide. It is an elegant logic, as simple and profound as breath. Life and death do not overlap. Consciousness and its absence cannot mingle. The mind that would suffer from death disappears the instant death arrives. So what then is there to fear? For Epicurus, the only rational response to mortality was tranquility. The universe, he said, contains no punishment waiting beyond the grave, no eternal suffering, no secret continuation of the self. When the body dissolves, so does the self. And what cannot feel cannot be harmed. He called this ataraxia, the unshakable calm of one who understands nature's laws. To fear death, in his view, was to mistake imagination for reality, to let shadows masquerade as substance. Imagine for a moment lying in perfect, dreamless sleep, not restless, not anxious, simply absent. In that state there is no fear, no memory, no pain. Epicurus suggested that death is like this, but deeper, an eternal absence of experience. No darkness, no light, only the end of perception itself. We do not tremble at the eternity before we were born. Why should we tremble at the eternity that follows? The two are mirrors facing one another, vast, silent, identical, and yet, even as logic soothes, the heart resists. There is something in us that does not want to be comforted by reason. The mind nods in agreement, but the body tightens all the same. We can understand that death cannot harm us, yet still we flinch. Why? Perhaps because knowledge does not erase imagination. We can picture our absence, but only from within our presence, a paradox that thought cannot resolve. We try to imagine not existing, but the moment we try, we exist to do so. The mind keeps breathing even in its attempt to stop. And somewhere deep within, instinct still whispers, "Hold on." Epicurus lived in an age when fear was religion's currency. Gods punished and rewarded, fate demanded obedience, and afterlife myths shaped how people lived and died. Against this tide, he offered a radical kind of kindness, to release people from fear through understanding. The universe, he said, is made of atoms and void. Nothing supernatural governs it, nothing eternal waits beyond it. We are temporary arrangements of matter and motion, destined to dissolve. But this is not tragedy. It is nature's rhythm. Every element of us returns to the world that made it. The breath to the wind, the warmth to the air, the atoms to the soil and stars. What we call death is only rearrangement, a shifting of form within an unbroken totality. We do not fall out of existence. We fall back into everything, and yet Epicurus's comfort depends on accepting that the self is entirely physical, that there is no you apart from the body that thinks you. For some, that idea is freeing, for others, unbearable. To see consciousness as chemistry, love as electrical pattern, and fear as biological inheritance can feel cold, but perhaps the coldness is the point. The universe, in its vast neutrality, is not cruel. It simply is. The garden of Epicurus became a sanctuary for those who sought refuge from divine terror. There, philosophy was therapy, a medicine for the soul. He taught that fear of death poisons life. It makes us cling, hoard, hurry, and despair. Once that fear dissolves, what remains is appreciation, the ability to savor the limited without wishing for the infinite. To look at a sunset and not grieve its ending because the ending gives it color. Science has, in many ways, confirmed the bones of his reasoning. The mind, as far as we can measure, emerges from the brain. When the neural pattern stops, so does consciousness. In that quiet, there is no one left to miss anything. But science cannot comfort by evidence alone. Comfort lives in how the evidence is received. To know that we vanish may feel hollow unless we also see that everything we were continues as motion through matter. The iron in your blood was once the heart of a star. The calcium in your bones once shimmered in the shell of an ancient sea. Your atoms are wanderers. Death is their next migration. Epicurus would smile at that thought. The self dissolves, but the universe keeps breathing through everything that once was you. Still, the unease remains. For most of us, fear of death is not purely rational. It is emotional, ancestral, stitched into the nervous system that kept our species alive. Even when philosophy explains, biology trembles. The body resists extinction, even as the mind accepts it. This, perhaps, is the true human condition, to know the inevitability of death and yet to live as if we could outthink it. Epicurus never meant to erase that tension. He meant to soften it. He wanted fear to become perspective. When you truly understand that nothing awaits beyond death, not pain, not punishment, not judgment, you begin to see the immense relief hidden inside impermanence. Life is precious not because it continues, but because it does not. So imagine this. You are lying under a night sky. The stars are ancient yet already dying. Their light crosses millions of years just to touch your eyes. You see them as they were, not as they are, echoes from a vanished past. That light is proof that death does not end presence. It only changes how it travels. Perhaps we too leave echoes, not of consciousness, but of consequence. The warmth we give, the ideas we share, the tenderness we leave behind, all ripple forward through the quiet fabric of time. And in that sense, Epicurus's comfort is not cold at all. It is gentle mathematical mercy. He does not deny death. He simply removes its teeth. He invites us to stop haunting ourselves with what we cannot feel. He reminds us that the absence of fear is not indifference. It is peace. When we are, death is not. When death is, we are not. Between those two conditions lies the entire miracle of being alive, brief, bright, and sufficient. So the next time you feel that faint shiver of awareness, the reminder that all this will end, breathe it in. Let it soften you, not harden you. Let it remind you how astonishing it is to exist at all. And remember Epicurus's quiet gift, that the greatest peace comes not from believing in eternity, but from finding serenity in the finite. For those who found comfort in Epicurus's calm logic, there remains a quiet question that logic cannot silence. If death is nothing, and if it cannot touch us, cannot hurt us, cannot even meet us, then why does it still feel like loss? Why do we mourn the dead and tremble at our own vanishing if the experience of death never truly belongs to us? Somewhere beneath reason, the ache persists. In the 20th century, philosopher Thomas Nagel tried to give shape to that ache. He did not argue with Epicurus directly. He simply turned the question slightly, as if adjusting the angle of light on glass. Death, he suggested, might harm us not by what it does to us, but by what it takes from us, by what it prevents. The tragedy is not in the moment of dying, but in the unfolding of a life that can no longer continue. Imagine a book ending mid-sentence. The story did not conclude. It simply stopped. The ink fades, the page goes blank, and everything that could have been written, every word, every memory, every laughter yet to come, disappears with it. The reader feels the loss, even if the character does not. That is the deprivation view. The harm of death lies in the futures it erases. Nagel invites us to see death not as an event, but as an interruption, the loss of possibilities that once shimmered ahead of us. To die at 20, at 40, at 80, each carries different weight, but the principle remains. Death shortens the arc of potential. It cuts through the unspoken sentence of existence. Even if we never feel that loss, the logic of absence remains, and yet there is a strange beauty in this line of thought. It recognizes that we live forward, always oriented toward what comes next. Plans, hopes, loves, continuations. The mind is a horizon-making machine. It fills the unseen with expectation, and in doing so stretches time beyond the present. Death harms us by collapsing that horizon, by drawing the future inward until it disappears into a single point. So when we fear death, perhaps what we really fear is the narrowing of that horizon, the shrinking of tomorrow into nothing at all. We grieve not because something will happen, but because something will never happen again. This view feels intuitively true. When we mourn others, we do not imagine their pain. We mourn the smiles they will never give, the years they will never see, the memories that will never be made. The harm is invisible, but heavy. It is measured in absence, a silence where sound should have been. Nagel's philosophy gives that intuition shape. To him, Death is a harm even if it never touches the person who dies. It diminishes the world of value that their life contained. It subtracts a story from the library of being. And this, he argues, is reason enough to find death tragic. Not because we misunderstand it, but because we understand it too well. But his reasoning also stirs another question. If death is bad because it deprives us of future experiences, then why do we not grieve the eternity before we were born? Why does the time before our existence feel peaceful while the time after feels unbearable? Nagel leaves this puzzle open, hinting that the direction of time may shape the direction of meaning. We do not remember the past we never lived, but we anticipate the future we might. Death cuts that thread of anticipation. It stops the loom of experience mid-pattern. To think this way is to admit that life has asymmetry built into its structure. We are always oriented forward, looking to what could be. Our joy, our ambition, our love all depend on that open door. And so when death closes it, even gently, it feels like a theft. Still, there is tenderness in Nagel's reasoning. It does not condemn death. It simply acknowledges the cost of being mortal. It reminds us that every life, no matter how long, is incomplete. There is always another path that could have been taken, another story that could have unfolded. But perhaps that incompleteness is what makes living so precious. The awareness of loss is what gives value to what remains. Think of a piece of music. It must end, or it ceases to be music. Yet every note before the last is enriched by knowing the last will come. Life is the same. Its brevity creates its melody. The deprivation Nagel describes can also be seen as the very condition that makes meaning possible. We love fiercely because we cannot love forever. We build memories because time threatens to erase them. So maybe death is both harm and harmony, the silence that defines the song. Philosophically, Nagel's view also challenges the calm of Epicurus. It asks whether peace should come from acceptance or from resistance. If death deprives us of goods and of joy, growth, knowledge, affection, then perhaps our discomfort is justified. Perhaps the right response is not tranquility, but awe, a reverence for how much can fit into the narrow corridor of a human life. And yet, when we follow that reverence long enough, even it turns quiet. For if every life is incomplete, then completion was never the goal. The value of existence may not lie in its length, but in its intensity, in the awareness that each moment, however brief, is its own universe of experience. Nagel's insight can soften into gratitude when seen through this lens. What death takes away, life gives first. The harm of losing tomorrows reminds us to honor today, to see deprivation not as despair but as invitation, to fill what time we have with presence, rather than waiting for the infinite that will never arrive. Imagine a life stretched endlessly forward, no deadlines, no endings, no urgency. Would it still hold meaning? Would love feel as sharp, laughter as precious, sunlight as golden, if they were guaranteed forever? It is precisely because death draws a line that we reach toward one another across it. The loss of futures illuminates the value of now. So Nagel's argument, read gently, becomes not a lament, but a reminder. Death may harm us through absence, but that very absence teaches us to notice presence. Every second is a future still alive, every breath a continuation that could have been denied. And when our own time comes, when the story ends mid-sentence, perhaps it will not feel like robbery, but completion. For the book of life was never meant to fill the shelf. It was meant to be read, felt, and finally set down, its unwritten pages shimmering quietly in imagination. Maybe that's the hidden grace within the hidden harm. We mourn the futures we'll never live, but they remind us to live the present we still hold. The loss itself becomes a teacher, showing us how to cherish without clinging, how to love without demanding forever. And so the question remains, not as fear, but as reflection. If death takes away what could have been, does it not also reveal with perfect clarity the miracle of what already is? There is a quiet question that lingers after every argument about death, a question so simple it feels like still water. When exactly does death harm us? Before it happens? While it happens? After it has already passed? It seems like such a small inquiry, just a matter of timing, and yet it slips through the hands of logic like mist. If death is truly the end of experience, then it cannot harm us after it occurs, for there is no us left to feel it. And if harm requires an experiencer, then the moment of dying cannot be the moment of suffering. But before death, while we still live, death has not yet arrived. So how can something that is not yet real cause real pain? The harm of death seems to exist in no moment at all. A shadow with no source, a silence with no sound. Epicurus saw this paradox and smiled. He believed it was proof that death could not touch us because its harm never coincides with our being. But centuries later, thinkers like Thomas Nagel and Derek Parfit wondered whether time itself might be distorting our view, that perhaps the harm of death does not live in a single instant, but is spread like faint light across the entire duration of a life. Death's meaning may not rest in its occurrence, but in its anticipation. To understand this, imagine time not as a line, but as an ocean. Each moment is a ripple on the surface, touching the next, folding into the last. The future leaks into the present. The present carries traces of what is yet to come. We live not only now, but partly in what we expect, what we dread, what we dream. Death, though not yet here, seeps into that ocean of awareness, a future fact shaping present feeling. In this sense, death may harm us through consciousness itself. Our ability to look ahead is both our gift and our curse. The bird does not suffer the thought of its final flight. The tree does not mourn the winter it cannot escape. Only we, with our luminous, restless minds, suffer from what has not yet happened. We live in the shadow of a moment that never quite arrives. And yet, perhaps this awareness is also what deepens our being. The same vision that allows us to imagine endings allows us to create meaning before they come. The anticipation of death compresses life into significance. We feel time because we know it will run out. Think of how differently we live when we sense that time is short, how colors brighten, how voices soften, how trivial grievances dissolve. The knowledge of ending amplifies every moment that remains. It's as if mortality tunes perception, bringing it into sharp, tender focus. Death, from this angle, does not merely subtract, it sharpens. It makes being finite an act of attention. Still, the paradox remains unsolved. If we cannot locate death's harm in time, before, during, or after, then perhaps the problem lies not in death, but in how we think about time itself. We imagine time as a straight line moving from birth to death like a train on rails. But what if it isn't linear? What if it's a field, an ever-present expanse, where every moment coexists, where past and future are simply perspectives, not directions? In physics, some theories of space-time suggest that all moments exist simultaneously, that the past is not gone, the future not unborn, but all eternally suspended in the fabric of reality. In such a universe, death is not an end, but a boundary, a region of the space-time map where consciousness ceases to appear. From this cosmic view, no one truly disappears. They simply no longer occupy the coordinates where awareness once shimmered. This thought is strangely calming. It reframes death not as an annihilation, but as a rearrangement of presence, a point beyond which the pattern of experience no longer repeats. The The person does not vanish from the map. Their section of time remains complete, unchanging, eternal. Every laugh, every heartbeat, every act of kindness, all still exist in their allotted coordinates, written into the fabric of space-time forever. So when does death harm us? Perhaps never, because harm itself requires change, and in the grand design, nothing truly changes. The story is already written, each page fixed in eternity. To die is simply to finish the sentence written for you, to become part of the stillness that holds the book closed. And yet, we live as if harm were real, as if the loss ahead were waiting for us personally. Maybe that illusion is necessary. Without the feeling of linear time, we would not move, would not love, would not create. Mortality is the lens that gives shape to meaning, even if the lens itself distorts reality. To exist is to stand at the edge of two infinities, the past that holds us and the future that dissolves us. Death hides within that meeting point, never arriving, always present. Like the horizon, it recedes as we approach. Epicurus told us not to fear it. Nagel told us to grieve its theft. Parfit suggested that the self who fears it may not even be the same self who dies. Each of them touched a part of the same paradox, that death has no single moment, yet its awareness colors all moments. It is not an event, but a condition of existing at all. So maybe the harm of death is not harm at all. Maybe it is simply the echo of time reminding us of its boundaries, the soft pressure that makes every instant more vivid. Perhaps that's why even the thought of death feels sacred. It slows us down, it stretches perception until we see how miraculous it is that anything happens at all. Time does not rush toward death, it flows through it like a current through open sea. The wave does not mourn the shore it will crash upon. It only feels the motion, the pull, the surrender to gravity. And when it dissolves, it rejoins the same vast water from which it came. So, the next time you wonder when death harms us, let the question fade. Let it dissolve like a footprint beneath a wave. There is no moment where death exists apart from life. There is only this, the slow unraveling of seconds into silence, the patient rhythm of a universe breathing in and out of being, and in that rhythm perhaps harm and peace are the same thing. Two faces of the same motion, two notes of the same eternal song. There is a particular kind of silence that only philosophy can reach, the silence that lives between words, between thoughts, where language itself begins to falter. Tonight we step into that silence, into the dim corridors of being and time, where Martin Heidegger waited for us, patient and severe, whispering a question older than consciousness itself. What does it mean to exist, knowing that we must die? Heidegger called us Dasein, literally being there. Not a soul, not a body, not a machine of thought, but a being aware of its own presence, thrown into the world and forced to make meaning from it. Dasein is not simply alive. It is aware of being alive. It feels the passing of time. It knows, however faintly, that one day the world will continue without it. That awareness, Heidegger said, is not a flaw. It is the very structure of human existence. For most of our lives, we hide from this truth. We bury it beneath routine, distraction, ambition, and comfort. We act as though we will go on indefinitely, as though death is an event reserved for others. Heidegger called this state das Man, the they-self. It is the anonymous way of existing, where we dissolve into the crowd, living as people live, doing as people do, rarely questioning the source of our borrowed meanings. But beneath that surface, something stirs, a faint unease, a tension in the fabric of the everyday. It is the quiet reminder that everything familiar is temporary, that every moment is suspended above an abyss of impermanence. Heidegger called this unease angst, not fear, which has an object but a diffuse awareness of our own finitude. It is not death itself that terrifies us, but the sense of nothingness that surrounds our being, the silent horizon at the edge of life. Heidegger didn't see this anxiety as weakness. To him, angst was a doorway. Through it, we can awaken to authenticity, to the realization that our existence is uniquely our own, not borrowed, not repeatable. When we face death, not as an abstract idea, but as the ultimate possibility of our being, we are no longer lost in the chatter of the world. We become present, truly, profoundly present, because we understand that every moment could be our last. Death, for Heidegger, is not an event at the end of life. It is the horizon that gives life its shape. It is the silent outline around every choice we make, the boundary that allows significance to exist at all. A life without death would be flat, without tension or direction, an endless surface with no contours. But mortality gives depth. It gives urgency. It turns existence into a question we must answer with every breath. Imagine your life as a painting. Without the edge of the canvas, there is no composition, only chaos. Death is that edge. It does not erase the image. It defines it. Heidegger's challenge is not to escape death, nor to deny it, but to live toward it, to hold its presence close, not as despair, but as orientation. He called this stance sein zum Tode, being toward death. It is not morbid, it is awakening. When we accept that we are finite, our priorities realign. The trivial dissolves. The essential glows. In the stillness of that realization, something remarkable happens. The fear of death transforms into a tenderness toward life. We stop waiting for meaning to be given to us and begin creating it ourselves. Every act, every word, every small kindness becomes an assertion against the void, a quiet declaration that our existence, however brief, matters because we choose to make it so. And yet, Heidegger's philosophy is not comfort in the usual sense. It does not soothe with promises of continuity. It demands that we stand face to face with nothingness and remain there, unblinking. In doing so, it gives us back the full weight of being alive. It strips away illusions and leaves us raw, aware, awake. To live as being toward death is to see time differently, not as a line that moves from birth to end, but as a luminous field where every moment is thick with possibility because it could vanish. The ticking clock no longer feels like a countdown, but a pulse, proof that we are still here, still capable of shaping what remains. Heidegger believed that authenticity is born from this awareness. When we stop living according to what they say life should be and start living according to what we know it must end as, we become our truest selves. Death individualizes us. It returns us from the crowd to the singular rhythm of our own existence. It tells us you cannot outsource your living. No one can die for you. This realization, far from morbid, is strangely intimate. It draws us inward, into the core of our being, where all the noise of comparison and convention fades. There we find a quiet kind of freedom. Not the freedom to escape death, but the freedom to live meaningfully within it. And what does that mean, to live meaningfully within death? Heidegger does not give answers. He gives direction. It means to act with awareness, speak with honesty, to love with the knowledge that love too will end, to inhabit each day as though it were both the first and the last, to see the world not as something owed to us, but as a gift borrowed from time itself. In this way, being toward death becomes not a philosophy of endings but of beginnings. It is a philosophy of attention. When we accept the horizon, we stop looking past it and begin to see what lies before us. The texture of sunlight, the warmth of another hand, the infinite detail in every passing second. There is a deep calm in this awareness. Death once an intruder, becomes a companion. It walks beside us, reminding us gently, this moment is irreplaceable. This breath will never return. This chance to love, to wonder, to forgive, it exists only now. Heidegger does not offer us comfort in eternity. He offers us the miracle of presence. He turns our gaze from the abstract idea of forever to the concrete immediacy of today. And in doing so, he restores what fear had stolen, our capacity to live with depth. To live toward death is to live awake. It is to see the fragile beauty in impermanence, to recognize that the meaning of life is not hidden in distant explanations, but revealed in how we inhabit the seconds we are given. So perhaps the quiet challenge Heidegger leaves us is not about death at all, but about life. Can we bear to live without denial? Can we let mortality not paralyze us but guide us? Can we treat existence itself as the rarest phenomenon in the universe, a flicker of awareness in the dark sea of time? Death remains the horizon. It recedes as we move, shaping our vision, defining our sense of direction. And just like the horizon, we can never reach it, only live within its light. When you wake tomorrow and sunlight drifts through your window, remember, you are not merely alive. You are a being who knows it will end. That knowledge is not a burden. It is your greatest intimacy with existence. To be Dasein is to stand between being and nothingness, and to make something luminous from that tension. To be being toward death is to transform awareness of the end into reverence for the moment, and in that transformation, perhaps lies the most profound calm of all. The quiet understanding that death does not wait at the end of life, but breathes within it, shaping every second into meaning. Anxiety in Heidegger's world is not an intruder to be silenced, but a messenger to be heard. It is not panic or fear, not the frantic pounding of a heart under threat, but something far older and quieter. A trembling of awareness, a subtle shiver in the core of being that reminds us that we are here, fragile and finite, standing between existence and its absence. It comes without object, without reason, without warning. It visits not when danger is near, but when meaning slips its mask. For a moment, the world that felt familiar, the routines, the names, the certainties, begins to lose its texture, and you feel the raw strangeness of simply existing. This, Heidegger said, is angst, the trembling not of fear, but of revelation. When we fear, we are afraid of something, a fall, an illness, a storm, an ending. Fear has direction. It points towards survival. But anxiety has no object. It reveals the open sky beneath all our scaffolding, the sheer emptiness that makes everything possible. In anxiety, the world does not threaten us. It withdraws from us. The ordinary loses its weight, and for a brief instant, you glimpse the void beneath the structure of meaning. It is disorienting, even vertiginous, yet in that disorientation lies a strange kind of clarity. You feel yourself not as a collection of roles or labels, but as a naked consciousness suspended in time. You realize that you could not have been, and that someday you will not be. And somehow, that realization sets you free. Most of the time, we live half asleep, cocooned in the repetition of days. We chase deadlines, uphold identities, measure success by what others applaud. Heidegger called this the life of das Man, the they. We do as people do, think as people think, rarely questioning who it is that's doing the living beneath the mask. But anxiety cracks that mask. It whispers that nothing here is fixed. Not our possessions, not our beliefs, not even the self that clings to them. Everything is temporary, contingent, passing through the thin light of existence before dissolving back into silence. The self that awakens in anxiety sees this, feels it and trembles, not out of despair but out of recognition. To stop fleeing from that trembling is to begin to live with authenticity. When you face the inevitability of death, the hierarchy of importance rearranges itself. What once seemed urgent begins to fade. What once felt small begins to glow. Death seen clearly erases triviality. It removes the clutter from consciousness and leaves only what truly matters: love, wonder, curiosity, gentleness, creation. The rest, all the noise of comparison and striving, falls away like dust in sunlight. This is why Heidegger called anxiety a gift, because in its hollow center we rediscover the fullness of being alive. There is a difference between fear and awe, though both make the body tremble. Fear contracts the world, awe expands it. Fear imagines catastrophe, awe feels infinity. When you stand before the vastness of the sea or the silent dark of space, something similar to anxiety stirs, a recognition of your smallness, but not as humiliation, as belonging. The same awareness that death will end you also tells you that you are part of something immeasurably larger. To feel that is to be freed from both arrogance and despair. You are no longer the center, but neither are you lost. You are a note within a boundless song, and so the anxiety that once paralyzed begins to open into presence. You stop asking how to escape death and start asking how to inhabit life. Each gesture becomes deliberate, each breath a kind of gratitude. Time slows, not because the clock moves differently, but because your perception expands into the moment. Heidegger would call this being resolute, not in the sense of defiance, but of acceptance. To live resolutely is to live in awareness of death without running from it, to let mortality inform your choices instead of haunting them. There is a freedom that only finitude allows. If life were endless, decisions would lose their gravity, promises would lose their meaning. Infinity dissolves value, but limitation concentrates it. To know that something will end makes it matter. The flower is beautiful not despite its brief bloom, but because of it. The same is true for us. The trembling that reminds us of our fragility also reveals our capacity for depth. We are not meant to live forever. We are meant to live attentively. Philosophers and psychologists after Heidegger tried to domesticate this insight, to turn it into therapy, to make it useful. But its power lies not in utility, it lies in wonder. The anxiety that frees us is not meant to be cured. It is meant to be heard, like distant thunder announcing rain. It reminds us that existence itself is improbable, that there could just as easily have been nothing, and yet here we are. To feel anxious in the face of that mystery is to be fully awake. So the next time anxiety rises like a tide in your chest, try not to treat it as an enemy. Let it speak. Beneath its surface lies the same awareness that stirs the philosopher, the artist, the poet. The awareness that everything you love will end, and that this is precisely why love matters. Anxiety does not destroy meaning, it carves it. It burns away distraction until only the essential remains. To live without anxiety would be to live without reflection, without awe. Even the calmest sea must have depth. Our stillness depends on what we have faced, not on what we have avoided. The peace that follows anxiety is different from ignorance. It is the peace of having looked directly at impermanence and survived the gaze. You cannot unsee your mortality once you have glimpsed it, but you can learn to see through it, to the transparency beyond, where life gleams all the more vividly for being finite. Heidegger never meant for his words to soothe. He meant them to awaken. But awakening, once the initial trembling subsides, is the most profound serenity of all. It is the serenity that comes from no longer pretending that time is endless. It is the calm of knowing that this brief, luminous interval between nothing and nothing is all we will ever have, and that it is enough. And so anxiety, when understood, is not a curse, but a compass. It points us back toward the real, toward the immediate, toward the fragile miracle of being here at all. It frees us from the prison of distraction and brings us home to presence. To live with it is to live with open eyes, to walk gently on the trembling ground of existence, aware that every step, every breath, every moment of awareness is borrowed, and therefore sacred. When the next wave of unease comes, that sudden reminder of mortality, that tremor in the chest, do not chase it away. Let it wash through you like wind through leaves. Feel what it is trying to show you. That you are alive, that you know you are alive, that in this awareness lies both fragility and infinite worth. And as it passes, what remains is not fear, but freedom. The still, unshakable calm of a being who has learned to breathe beside the abyss and call it home. It begins not with a scream, but with a whisper, the whisper of knowing too early, too clearly, that we will die. Somewhere in the mind of every human being lies this realization, faint but constant, like a pulse beneath thought. Ernest Becker called it the terror of death, and he believed it was the hidden engine behind everything we do. Our achievements, our cultures, our faiths, our art. All of it, he said, is armor. Beautiful armor, yes, but armor nonetheless. Humanity's grandest creations, he suggested, may be nothing more than elaborate ways to forget that the end is inevitable. Becker's insight did not come from cynicism, but from compassion. He saw that the awareness of mortality is both our curse and our crown. No other creature knows with such clarity that it will end. The animal flees danger, but it does not imagine its own extinction. We do. We are the only beings who can die before dying, who can suffer from the thought itself. That awareness is unbearable, and so the mind builds shelters to live beneath. Religion promises eternity, culture promises remembrance, love promises continuation. We weave meaning like cloth and wrap it around our trembling hearts. He called this structure of protection a symbolic immortality project. It is not literal survival we crave, but significance. The feeling that something of us will persist, that our brief spark will leave a mark on the dark. We create nations, philosophies, languages, legacies. We build monuments and write books. We have children, compose music, chase fame. Each of these, in Becker's view, is a way of saying, I was here. I mattered. It is not vanity that drives us, but terror disguised as ambition. The terror of knowing that the universe does not know us back. And yet, there is tenderness in this terror. It means that we care. It means that existence, fragile as it is, has weight for us. But when fear goes unacknowledged, it becomes distortion. Becker warned that civilizations, like individuals, defend their denial of death with desperation. Every belief system becomes a fortress against mortality, and anyone who threatens it becomes the enemy. The wars of ideology, the violence of righteousness, the hostility of nations, all may trace their roots to the fragile wish to be right about what happens after the end. When our immortality project feels endangered, we strike to preserve it. Behind our conflicts lies the same frightened heartbeat, trying to make existence mean something more than dust. This is the tragedy Becker revealed, that our fear of death left unseen breeds division. But he also saw the possibility of transcendence. If we could face this fear together, not alone, not defensively, but with honesty, compassion might emerge. For what could we truly hate in another once we understand that they too are terrified? Once we see that beneath all masks, political, cultural, religious, there beats the same anxious heart seeking safety and meaning. Becker's work, distilled in The Denial of Death, was not written to erase hope, but to purify it. He believed that true courage lies not in conquering death, but in accepting its presence without illusion. To live authentically, we must look into the abyss and still choose to create, to love, to build beauty from what we know will fade. Denial keeps us comfortable. Awareness makes us human. Imagine a vast cathedral, centuries old, carved from stone by hands that turned to dust long ago. The builders knew they would never see it completed, yet they built it anyway. That is the paradox of mortality awareness. It can drive both despair and devotion. When we deny death, we build out of fear. When we face it, we build out of love. Becker's ideas were later tested by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pischinsky, who developed what became known as terror management theory. Their experiments revealed that reminders of death, even subtle ones, a passing funeral hearse, a graveyard in the distance, could shift human behavior in measurable ways. People clung more tightly to their beliefs, favored their own groups more fiercely, and grew more hostile toward outsiders. Mortality salience, they called it, the activation of death awareness. Becker had been right. Beneath our calm surfaces, fear silently shapes our societies. But he had also hinted at a different response, a gentler one. If awareness of death can trigger defensiveness, perhaps a deeper awareness, one that accepts mortality instead of repressing it, can dissolve hostility. If we stop fighting for the illusion of permanence, we might start living for the truth of connection. Compassion, after all, begins where denial ends. To understand this, picture two people standing before the ocean. One sees threat, vastness, depth, dissolution, and recoils. The other sees continuity, a motion that has existed long before and will exist long after, a belonging too large to grasp. The ocean has not changed. Only the gaze has. So it is with death. For some, it is terror. For others, it is invitation. The choice lies not in what death is, but in how we see it. Becker urged us to move from denial to integration, to make mortality a part of our awareness, not its enemy. He knew this would not erase anxiety, but transform it. The terror that once narrowed the mind could widen it instead, creating empathy, humility, and gentleness. When we see the shared fragility of all life, pride loses its grip. What becomes important is not victory, but presence. The simple act of being kind before time runs out. There is a quiet heroism in that shift. Becker called it the courage to be. To know you are temporary, to know that nothing you build will last forever, and yet to build anyway, not for glory, but for love of the act itself. This, he said, is the truest defiance against oblivion, not denial but affirmation. To exist consciously, even briefly in full knowledge of impermanence, that is the highest art. You can feel this philosophy pulse through all human expression. In music that fades into silence, in paintings that weather but never lose their color, in words written for readers unborn. Each gesture says, I accept that I will vanish, but not that my care was meaningless. The awareness of death gives rise to the beauty of effort, the poetry of persistence in a world that forgets. And so the terror of knowing becomes the mirror of living. It reflects our longing not just to survive, but to matter. And the moment we accept that we already do, not in eternity, but in the delicate intersections of now, the terror softens. Denial turns to recognition, and recognition turns to peace. Becker's message, heard in the quiet hours of the night, is both unsettling and soothing. We spend our lives constructing defenses against death, yet those defenses also protect us from fully living. When we lower them, when we face the vulnerability beneath, what we find is not despair, but tenderness. The same awareness that frightens us also binds us. We are each other's proof of existence, each other's continuation, each other's immortality in miniature. So tonight, if the thought of death drifts near, do not turn away. Let it pass through you like wind through an open room. Let it remind you that every gesture of kindness, every word of love, every act of creation is a rebellion against nothingness, not because it lasts forever, but because it happens at all. The terror of knowing is the cost of consciousness, but also its gift. It teaches us that the only permanence we will ever need is the one that exists in this very moment, in the awareness that you are here. Alive, aware, and capable of love in the face of the inevitable, and that, Becker might say, is enough. Across the long corridor of human history, one theme echoes beneath every structure, every song, every carved stone: the wish not to vanish. From the earliest cave walls to the spires of glass that now touch the sky, humanity has been building against time, constructing monuments not merely of stone or steel, but of hope. Beneath the sound of hammer and chisel, beneath the hum of modern machines, there has always been the same quiet rhythm, the heartbeat of denial. The architecture of immortality, every civilization, in its own way, has tried to speak back to death. The ancient Egyptians aligned pyramids with the stars so that their kings might rise with them forever. The Greeks built marble temples to gods who never aged. In China, emperors slept beneath mountains of clay soldiers, each one sculpted with the faith that eternity could be engineered. And we, inheritors of this old instinct, have built our own temples in the form of progress, skyscrapers that scrape the clouds, data preserved in digital vaults, stories that cross continents at the speed of light. Each gesture, grand or small, carries the same yearning to last, to be remembered, to outlive the silence that waits for all things. This, Ernest Becker would say, is our most creative illusion. The denial of death does not always come as ignorance. Often it arrives as art. It builds cathedrals and symphonies, philosophies and nations. It sculpts the shape of culture itself. The desire for permanence gives us architecture, history, language. Death denial, paradoxically, is the source of civilization. Without it, there might be no civilization to lose. We might never have written, never have built, never have dared. We owe much of our beauty to our fear, but beneath that beauty lies the trembling truth. For every monument rises from the shadow of what it cannot prevent. The Great Pyramid still stands, yet its builders' names have long dissolved into dust. The Colosseums, the temples, the archives, each is both defiance and surrender, a gesture that says, we know this will end, but not yet. Not while we can carve our names into stone. The architecture of immortality is not just physical, it is psychological, a way to bargain with the impossible. Consider how this instinct threads through our personal lives. We take photographs, write journals, build careers, raise children. We plant trees we will never see fully grown. We inscribe names on tombs so they might be spoken again. In each act, there is a quiet negotiation with time, a hope that memory itself is a kind of continuation. And perhaps in some way it is. Memory is the closest thing we have to resurrection. To be remembered is to linger faintly in the minds of others. The self may vanish, but its pattern echoes. Even love, perhaps our most sacred creation, carries this architecture. We say we fall in love because we see eternity in another's eyes, yet what we are truly seeing is reflection, the desire to be seen, to be held within memory beyond the limits of the body. Love is our most beautiful denial, our most tender rebellion against oblivion. We hold each other close not because it will save us from death, but because for a moment it makes death irrelevant. And still, for all our building, death's patience remains undefeated. The skyscraper will one day collapse, the data will fade into unreadable dust, and even our galaxies will thin into silence. If permanence is the dream, the universe itself will wake us from it. Yet within that inevitability lies a chance. Not for escape, but for understanding. If all things end, then meaning cannot depend on duration. It must live in the act itself, in the moment of creation rather than the hope of survival. Imagine walking through an ancient ruin, sunlight spilling through columns, the sound of wind carrying forgotten names. You feel a strange calm there, not despair. The ruin is not a failure. It is a continuation in another form. The stones have outlived their builders, but the builder's longing still lingers, soft as breath. The architecture of immortality becomes, in time, the architecture of memory, and memory, in turn, becomes the architecture of renewal. Every collapse feeds the next beginning. Science, too, has joined this old cathedral of defiance. We launch probes into the void with golden records of our existence. We map our genomes, preserve seeds, upload minds, simulate worlds. We turn mortality into data, believing perhaps that if enough is recorded, nothing will be lost. But even these modern miracles are part of the same ancient gesture, the human refusal to let go completely. The materials have changed, the longing has not. Yet something profound happens when we recognize this pattern for what it is. The denial of death, once seen, becomes less denial and more art. To know that our towers will fall and build them anyway is no longer arrogance. It is devotion. To write knowing the words will be forgotten is not futility. It is faith in the present. Acceptance, not denial, becomes the next act of creation. The architecture of immortality transforms from resistance to reverence. Perhaps that is the maturity of our species. To evolve from seeking permanence to embracing impermanence. To build not for forever but for now. A civilization that can accept its own transience might finally create without fear. Its monuments would not be to eternity, but to presence. Structures meant not to defy time, but to harmonize with it, dissolving gracefully when their season ends. There is a quiet beauty in this thought. To live without needing to outlast the world is to finally belong to it. The same impulse that once built tombs can build gardens. The same drive that once carved stone can cultivate compassion. When we no longer need to prove our worth to eternity, we become free to honor the brief, shimmering moment that is life. Imagine humanity's story seen from afar. A time lapse of rising and falling civilizations, of cities blooming and fading like coral. From that cosmic distance, our efforts might look fleeting, but not meaningless. Each structure, each song, each gesture of love is a light against the endless dark, a momentary signature of consciousness saying, "We were here. We saw beauty. We tried to understand." That, perhaps, is immortality enough. So maybe the point was never to last forever. Maybe it was to build things that mattered while we could, things that remind others to look up, to wonder, to feel. The architecture of immortality was never really about defying death. It was about revealing what life can do when it knows it must end. The towers, the cathedrals, the stories, all of them are temporary miracles, fragile proofs of care written across centuries, and one day, when the final monument crumbles and the last echo fades, perhaps the universe itself will remember the brief glow of our striving, not in detail, but in essence. The same way the sea remembers the rain, or the stars remember the dust that once burned within them. For now, that is all the immortality we need, to build, to love, to create, not as denial, but as gratitude, for the privilege of existing, even briefly, in a world that forgets. There is a mirror hidden in the structure of time, a silent symmetry that stretches behind us as far as it extends ahead. It is the thought that haunted the Roman poet Lucretius more than 2,000 years ago, and still whispers to us in the quiet hours of the night. Why do we fear the end, but not the beginning? We mourn the loss of futures we will never live, yet we do not grieve the millennia before our birth. If the nothingness after death is like the nothingness before, why does one seem so terrifying and the other so calm? This is the symmetry problem, simple in form but endlessly deep. It begins as logic and ends as revelation. To exist is to find yourself suspended between two vast absences and to call the thin line between them life. For a moment consciousness flares, a match struck in infinite dark, and then the flame goes out. The darkness before and after are the same, but our minds refuse to see them as equal. We call one mystery, the other peace. We accept the void that preceded us, but resist the void that awaits. Why? Lucretius, the Epicurean poet, believed the answer was ignorance of symmetry. He wrote that the time before our birth and the time after our death are mirrors, identical in their stillness. We do not lament not having lived in the age of the dinosaurs, nor ache for the centuries when the stars burned without our eyes to see them. We were absent, and it did not hurt. The state after death, he reasoned, will be no different. The pain of non-existence is an illusion. There is no one left to feel it. Fear belongs to the living, not to the dead. Yet the fear remains. Perhaps because the void behind us is abstract, a memory we never had, while the void ahead feels personal, the loss of what we could have remembered. The mind, oriented forward, feels deprivation in advance. We imagine futures we will not see, people who will live without us, sunlight that will rise for others, but not for our eyes. The symmetry breaks not in the fabric of time, but in the structure of consciousness. We project ourselves into what is to come, but cannot project backward into what never was. Still, Lucretius's mirror invites us to soften. It reminds us that the universe is not plotting harm against us. It simply continues indifferent but whole. The same tranquility that filled the cosmos before our arrival will follow after our departure. Between those infinities lies the luminous interval of being. Brief, fragile, but wondrous. To contemplate that symmetry is not to diminish life. It is to frame it. The darkness makes the flame visible. Think of existence as a circle, not a line. There is no true before or after, only the turning of form into form. The atoms that compose you now have been many things. Dust, water, stone, living breath. They have drifted through stars and soil, through lungs and oceans, waiting for this particular arrangement, this fleeting awareness you call I. When the pattern ends, the materials remain, ready for new configurations. You have always been part of the world, even when you were not conscious of it. You were never truly absent, only silent. And so perhaps the symmetry is not perfect after all. The nothingness before birth was not empty. It was full of potential. The nothingness after death will be, too. The difference is not between two voids, but between two forms of belonging. Before, as matter, waiting to awaken. After, as matter returning to rest. The universe breathes us in and exhales us back. We are not interruptions in eternity. We are its rhythm. Still, the human heart resists this calm. It does not want to dissolve into symmetry. It wants to continue as itself. It wants to remember, to love again, to stay. That longing is what makes us human. And yet, it is also what makes peace so hard to find. The challenge is not to suppress the longing, but to understand it. Fear of death is not simply fear of non-existence. It is fear of losing connection. But perhaps from the universe's point of view, connection is never lost, only transformed. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the time before you existed. Not the abstract history of the earth, but the actual silence before you. The world turning, the stars burning, the rivers flowing without your witness. Now imagine the time after you had the same rivers, the same stars continuing their slow patterns. The difference is perception, not being. The continuity remains. Existence does not depend on the observer. It only borrows their gaze for a while. This is what the symmetry problem tries to teach. That the fear of death may be an error of perspective. We stand too close to time, mistaking our frame for the picture. Step back far enough and the timeline flattens. The absence before and the absence after become one continuous field with a single bright interval of awareness in between. And within that interval, every color, every sound, every touch becomes sacred precisely because it will not last. Some philosophers, like Thomas Nagel, argued that the symmetry is imperfect, that our sense of harm from death arises from being deprived of future goods we can imagine, not past ones we cannot. But even Nagel's protest reveals something beautiful, the forward pull of life itself, the way consciousness is always reaching toward more light. That reaching is what makes us alive, and the loss of it, the cessation of striving, is what defines death. But in the cosmic sense, even this reaching belongs to the symmetry. It is the tension of the flame, the upward flicker that gives shape to the dark. So maybe the question is not why we fear death, but why we trust life. We trust it enough to sleep, to let go, to forget ourselves each night and return in the morning. Death, from a certain distance, is the final sleep. Not punishment, not tragedy, just the continuation of the same rhythm in another register. The peace before birth was total because it required no awareness. The peace after death may be the same. Not something to feel, but something that simply is. When Lucretius looked into this mirror of existence, he did not see despair. He saw serenity, a world unfolding endlessly, with or without him, and a comfort in knowing that his fear was misplaced. "Look back," he said to his readers, "at the eternity before your birth. Was it dreadful? Then why fear the eternity to come?" It is a simple symmetry, but a profound one, because it reminds us that fear depends on imagination, and imagination ends before death does. The next time you find yourself thinking of endings, turn the thought around. Look backward instead of forward. The universe held you once before without pain, without absence, without regret. It will hold you again. Between those two infinite silences, you have been given the rarest of gifts, a finite moment of awareness. It need not last forever to be infinite in meaning, so rest in that symmetry. Let it steady you. The darkness before and after are not enemies. They are the same quiet sea, and you are its brief, beautiful wave. Imagine never dying. Imagine the years folding into decades, the decades dissolving into centuries, and time itself stretching before you like an endless horizon without dusk. At first, the thought glows with a kind of wonder. No ending, no loss, no grief. Every dream could be lived, every knowledge acquired, every love revisited. The fear of death, the great shadow over life, would finally be gone. But as the light of this vision deepens, another shadow appears within it. A quiet, haunting question. Would forever truly be a gift? Or would it slowly and softly become its own kind of cage? Philosopher Bernard Williams asked this question in one of the most poetic essays of modern thought, through the story of a woman named Elena Macropoulos. In the play that bears her name, Elena has lived for more than 300 years, sustained by an elixir of eternal life. She has seen empires rise and fall, languages shift, faces blur and disappear. At first, immortality was her triumph. Freedom from decay, freedom from fear. But now, centuries later, she is weary. Nothing surprises her. Nothing moves her. She has lived every possible rhythm of existence, and all that remains is repetition. The gift has turned to burden. She longs not for more life, but for the end she once escaped. Williams used her story to reveal something profound about human nature, that our lives derive meaning not from their endlessness, but from their shape, their contour, their arc. Mortality gives life its melody. Without an ending, there can be no crescendo, no resolution. The finite makes the infinite bearable by giving it pattern. If we were to live forever, he argued, we would lose the very texture of experience that makes living worthwhile. The capacity for renewal would fade, for renewal depends on conclusion. Immortality, far from liberation, might be the slow erosion of desire. Think of the moments that move you most deeply. The last page of a novel, the closing notes of a song, the final look between two people before parting. Their power comes from the awareness that they will not return. Eternity, by contrast, erases endings, and with them emotion, For what can be precious in a world where nothing can be lost? The scarcity of life is its value. Without scarcity, there is only monotony, a sameness so total it begins to dissolve meaning itself. Williams called this the Macropulos case. Immortality, even if possible, would eventually rob life of all significance. Yet still, the dream of forever seduces us. Across religions and myths, eternity is the highest promise. Heaven, reincarnation, the digital afterlife. We imagine paradise not as peace, but as continuation, an unbroken line of identity extending beyond time. Perhaps this longing is not truly for immortality, but for permanence, for something in us to remain untouched by change. But in a universe made of transformation, permanence may be a kind of stillness that life cannot bear. Science, too, has begun to touch the edges of this ancient wish. Longevity research promises decades more vitality. Some speak even of biological escape velocity, where aging itself is defeated. The old myth returns in new language, not elixirs, but algorithms, not temples, but laboratories. Yet even here, the question persists. What kind of existence would remain if time lost its limit? Would consciousness, stripped of conclusion, still find beauty? Would curiosity survive eternity? Or would endless repetition flatten wonder into fatigue? There is a reason even stars must die. Their deaths seed the cosmos with the materials for new worlds. Without endings, the universe would stagnate, frozen in permanence. Death at every scale is the engine of renewal. Perhaps the same is true for us. Mortality is not a flaw in the design, it is the design. The fact that our lives are brief makes them vivid. Like light through a narrow window, consciousness intensifies when framed by limits. Eternity, by contrast, would diffuse it into grey infinity. Not darkness, but absence of contrast. And yet there is tenderness in the dream of forever. To wish for eternity is to love life so fiercely that we cannot imagine letting it go. The desire for immortality is not greed, it is affection. It is the heart's refusal to accept the boundaries that the mind knows must exist. But if we look closely, we may see that this longing can be honored not by escaping death, but by embracing life more fully while it is here. To live as if time were infinite is to lose the urgency that gives love its shape. To live knowing time is finite is to cherish every second like a universe. Williams's argument is not meant to strip hope, but to deepen it. It tells us that mortality is not the thief of meaning, it is its author. Every joy gleams brighter against the backdrop of impermanence. Every act of kindness, every gesture of creation is luminous precisely because it will not last. In this way, death does not cancel beauty, it concentrates it. Eternity, paradoxically, might destroy the very thing it tries to preserve. Imagine again Elena Macropulos, centuries old, sitting beneath an endless sky. The seasons no longer matter. Stars have lost their names. She cannot die, but she also cannot grow. Her life, once rich with surprise, has become a flat plain stretching forever. She no longer fears death, she envies it. She understands at last that finitude was the soul's anchor, that the arc of mortality gave weight to every choice. To die, she now sees, is not the opposite of life, but its completion. And so we return to the strange mercy hidden within mortality. It hurts, yes, the knowledge that we will lose everything we love. But that same knowledge turns love into something holy. To know it will end is to know it matters. The dream of forever tempts us with comfort, but the truth of impermanence awakens us to depth. Death, in this light, is not an interruption of eternity, but the punctuation that gives eternity meaning. So perhaps the question was never whether eternal life would be a blessing, but whether we could bear to live without endings. If we were given forever, would we still marvel at the dawn? Would we still ache at music, still forgive, still reach out in wonder? Or would everything eventually become a single note stretched too long, a song that forgets it needs silence to be heard? There is grace, then, in the brevity of existence. The fact that it fades gives it texture the way light finds shape only through shadow. Eternity would erase both. No brightness, no darkness, just endless continuity. The dream of forever is beautiful in imagination, but in truth it is the dream of a life that has forgotten how to feel. So tonight, when you think of the end, do not wish it away. Let it remind you that this finite, fleeting spark is where meaning lives. Death is not what limits life. It is what makes life luminous. Forever is not the goal. The goal is to live fully within the horizon, to love while there is time, to see the beauty in the briefness of being. For eternity may be the dream of gods, but impermanence is the poetry of humanity. There is another side to the dream of forever, a quieter, more hopeful light flickering beneath the melancholy of Bernard Williams's warning. If eternity risks monotony, could it not also offer possibility? If immortality can be weariness, might it also be wisdom? The philosopher Thomas Nagel once asked us to pause before declaring that death's absence was necessary for meaning. He saw in the human thirst for life not a defect, but a sign, that our longing to continue might itself be the purest expression of what makes life precious. Where others saw futility in endless existence, Nagel glimpsed a form of grace, perhaps. He suggested the problem is not eternity itself, but imagination. Our failure to see how infinite time could unfold in infinite ways. We imagine immortality as repetition, a single melody looping forever. But what if forever is not a circle, but an open field, endless, yes, but always changing? If consciousness could evolve without limit, then growth, curiosity, and love might never run out of new forms. The boredom Williams feared might not be inevitable. It might simply reflect the narrowness of our mortal vision. Think of how life feels even now within its boundaries. We grow, we forget, we rediscover. We shed versions of ourselves and inhabit new ones. A child cannot imagine the life of the elder they will become. A mind cannot foresee the thoughts it will hold in 10 years. Change is the thread that carries us forward, the quiet miracle that turns sameness into story. Nagel believed that if consciousness could retain that capacity for renewal, to learn, to feel, to transform, then endless existence need not be a curse. It could be the unfolding of potential without end, the slow blooming of a mind that never stops expanding. It is true that death gives life its urgency, but perhaps urgency is not the only source of meaning. Meaning can also come from depth, from a life lived in widening circles rather than fixed destinations. If death were removed, time might stretch, but awareness could deepen. Imagine centuries spent exploring not more places but more ways of seeing. Each moment, infinite in detail, could still hold wonder. The fear that eternity would dull perception assumes that joy is a finite resource. But what if joy, like space, has no edge? Nagel's quiet optimism offers a counterweight to despair. Where existentialists saw futility, he saw a hint of something transcendent, a defiance of the cosmic indifference that surrounds us. He did not deny that death is natural. He simply questioned whether its inevitability made it good. The fact that we resist it, he thought, might not be foolishness, but fidelity to life's own momentum. We are built to move toward continuation, to seek light, to persist. This instinct, too, is natural. The yearning for forever might be life recognizing itself. Even in our finite span, we already live fragments of immortality. Every discovery, every memory shared, every work of art carries part of us forward. A thought born in one mind can ripple through generations, evolving beyond its origin. Language itself is a form of living forever. Words outlasting their speakers, ideas reincarnating in new voices. Perhaps immortality is not a personal possession, but a process, the endless continuation of meaning through transformation. In that sense, Nagel's hope may already be true. Existence is an unbroken relay of consciousness, never identical, always unfolding. Still, the weight of forever is real. To live endlessly would require a strength beyond what we now possess. The ability to let go of past selves without losing coherence, to remember without being crushed by memory. Immortality, if it were possible, would demand not stasis, but adaptability. The courage to die within life again and again, shedding old layers while the flame endures. Eternal life could only remain meaningful if we carried within it the rhythm of death, small endings, quiet renewals. In this way, even in forever, mortality's wisdom would survive. Science in its own way echoes Nagel's rebellion. It shows us that the universe, though ancient, is not static. Stars are born, die, and are reborn in new forms. Even in cosmic time, eternity is a story of change. There is no endless sameness, only transformation without end. If the stars can persist through metamorphosis, perhaps consciousness could too. The dream of forever might not be to stay the same, but to keep becoming, and yet there is humility in this speculation. To wish for endless life is to stand in awe of existence itself, to say, "This is too beautiful to leave." But the wisdom of Nagel's hope is not that we must seek literal immortality. It is that we must not despair in the face of finitude. The longing to continue is not delusion, it is devotion. It reminds us that life, even when brief, is an experience so profound that we would wish it to never end. The weight of forever, then, is not the burden of time, but the burden of love. Perhaps immortality, in the end, is not about infinite years, but infinite openness, the willingness to meet each moment as if it were new. To be truly alive, even for a short while, is to experience something that eternity itself might envy, awareness that knows it is fleeting and therefore cherishes itself all the more. In that sense, Nagel's rebellion is less about overcoming death than about redeeming life. He reminds us that existence, however temporary, contains within it the same wonder we imagine in eternity. Imagine standing at the edge of the night sky, gazing at stars older than memory, their light traveling across unimaginable distance to reach your eyes. You see in that faint glow something like immortality, not yours, not anyone's, but existence itself continuing its quiet conversation with time. You are both fleeting and infinite in that moment, a consciousness born of matter that has always been and will always be in some form. Death cannot erase that connection. It can only change its shape. So, when we speak of forever, perhaps what we truly seek is not endless survival, but unbroken belonging, to feel that we are part of something that does not end. And we are. Whether or not we live forever as individuals, life itself does. The atoms in our bodies will drift into new configurations. Our thoughts will echo in others. We will dissolve into the same current that once formed us. The dream of forever is not outside of time. It is the continuity of being within it. Nagel's hope, then, is not naive. It is an act of reverence, a refusal to let fear define our relationship with existence. To hope against the clock is not to deny its ticking, but to listen differently, to hear in its rhythm the sound of life itself, steady and unstoppable. Forever may be an impossible promise, but the desire for it is the clearest proof of what we already are. Beings who love the world so deeply that even eternity would not feel long enough. There is a truth that moves softly beneath all things living. Meaning depends on endings. Without the shadow of death, the light of life would flatten into endless sameness. It is the limit that gives the moment its shape, the finitude that sculpts significance from the formless. We think of death as a thief, but it is also a craftsman, carving edges into time so that we may hold it, see it, feel it. Without that edge, there is no urgency, no courage, no story to tell. And so what we fear most may also be what makes life luminous. Imagine a life without boundaries. endless hours stretching outward, every possibility still available tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. At first, such a life feels like freedom, but slowly, imperceptibly, it becomes weightless. When there is no last time, there can be no this time. Each experience loses its clarity, blending into the next like waves that never meet the shore. Mortality, then, is the shoreline of meaning. It is the horizon that gives every sunset its poignancy, the fragile boundary that turns repetition into rhythm. Philosophers and poets alike have turned toward this paradox with reverence. Death, they say, is not the opposite of life, but its condition. In his later years, Martin Heidegger wrote that only a being aware of its own finitude can live authentically. For to know one's time is limited is to understand the weight of choice. Every decision, every love, every act of kindness becomes meaningful because it could have been otherwise, because it could have been delayed, but was not. The clock, far from being the enemy, is the silent companion that reminds us to live deliberately. And yet we spend so much of our days pretending time does not move. We speak of plans, of futures, of tomorrows, as if the present were just a hallway leading elsewhere. But every tomorrow is built from this single, fleeting now. The mind, anxious and ambitious, keeps trying to stretch life into something longer, safer, more controllable. Death interrupts that illusion. It reminds us again and again that time is not a resource to be managed, but a river to be entered. And once we step in, the current carries us, fast, unrepeatable, real. Think of a single day that mattered to you. The last conversation with someone you loved. The first time you saw the ocean, the quiet evening that changed nothing yet, stayed with you forever. Those moments glow because they ended. Their value was written by their impermanence. If they had stretched on forever, they would have faded into the background of your becoming. Death, by closing the circle, gives the line its meaning. Every ending turns what came before into a complete form, a pattern that can finally be seen. Thomas Nagel once wrote that human consciousness is both tragic and miraculous. Tragic, because it knows it will end. Miraculous, because it can imagine what it means. But perhaps the tragedy is softer than we think. The awareness of death is not merely sorrow. It is the engine of empathy. We look at others, knowing their time is as brief as ours, and we learn to care. Mortality connects us, leveling every hierarchy. The king and the child, the stranger and the beloved, all walk toward the same horizon. In that equality, meaning blooms. There is a tenderness, too, in the way death teaches gratitude. To wake in the morning and know that this day will not return is a quiet miracle. The taste of fruit, the sound of wind through leaves, the laughter of someone you love, all are made holy by their transience. If they were eternal, they would blur into monotony. Because they fade, they shine. Finitude sharpens attention. It asks us to see. The world, when looked at through mortality's lens, becomes unbearably vivid. Even the smallest thing, a shadow crossing the wall, a cup of tea cooling in the hand, carries the echo of the infinite. Science, in its own way, confirms this poetic truth. Entropy, decay, and transformation are not flaws in the system. They are the system. Stars burn out so that new ones may ignite. Matter cycles through death and rebirth endlessly, never lost, only rearranged. In the vast scale of the cosmos, finitude is not failure. It is how the universe breathes. To live, to die, to become part of something else. That is the rhythm of existence itself. We are not outside that rhythm. We are its fleeting song. To accept mortality, then, is to harmonize with the larger pattern. It does not mean resignation. It means seeing death not as the end of meaning, but as its culmination. The knowledge that life will end gives us the courage to live without postponement, to speak when the words matter, to forgive before time runs out. Death compresses meaning into the moment, forcing it to fit where eternity cannot. It is what turns potential into presence, what transforms the ordinary into the sacred. And perhaps this is why every culture, every faith and every art form returns again and again to the theme of impermanence. We build rituals, stories, and symbols to make peace with it, not because we can escape death, but because through understanding it, we learn how to live. In some sense, the meaning of life and the meaning of death are inseparable. Each gives birth to the other, each defines the other's outline. Without one, the other dissolves. Think of a candle burning in a dark room. The flame dances, consuming itself, and in that consumption it gives light. If the candle never burned, there would be no illumination, only potential. The beauty of the flame is inseparable from its fading. So too with us. We are not meant to last unchanged. We are meant to burn, to illuminate, and to pass the light onward. Every generation, every act of creation is a spark taken from the same eternal fire, each shining briefly before merging back into the dark. This realization need not bring despair. It can bring relief. It means that nothing is wasted. The love we give continues in the lives it touches. The work we create ripples beyond our knowing. Even the quiet moments, the unrecorded kindness, the silent gratitude, become part of the fabric of the world. Meaning does not depend on duration. It depends on presence. To live fully in a single moment is to participate in eternity, no matter how short the span. And so when we speak of the gift of finitude, we are not glorifying loss. We are recognizing pattern. Life's beauty is not diminished by its brevity. It is defined by it. Without endings, stories could not exist. Without decay, creation could not renew itself. Without death, there would be no reason to love so deeply, so urgently, so completely. Finitude is not a flaw to be cured, but a grace to be understood. The next time you feel the ache of impermanence, the sorrow of watching something end, the quiet grief of passing time, remember that this ache is proof of meaning. It is the mind's way of acknowledging beauty, of saying this mattered. The grain of time runs one way, but within it there is stillness. Within every ending, a continuation. Within every death, a whisper of life. And perhaps that is the final paradox, that meaning is not destroyed by death, but revealed by it. The end, when it comes, is not silence, but clarity. The still moment when the story we have lived finally becomes whole. And in that wholeness there is peace. Death, when seen not as a punishment but as a mirror, becomes the most patient of teachers. It waits quietly at the edges of our awareness, reminding us of what matters, softening what is harsh within us. From fear, tenderness blooms. From the certainty of endings comes the urgency to love, to forgive, to understand. The brevity of life does not harden the heart, it opens it. When we finally see how fragile we are, cruelty begins to feel absurd, anger becomes weightless, and compassion, once an effort, becomes instinct. Philosophy has always circled around this paradox that death, though it ends life, also deepens it. To live in the light of mortality is to see more clearly. The illusion of permanence fades, and what remains are the essentials: kindness, presence, connection. Heidegger called this resoluteness, the clarity that comes when one faces death directly. But beyond the language of thought, there is something simpler, more human. The quiet shift that happens when we realize every person we meet is also walking toward the same horizon. Every conversation, every glance, every conflict is framed by the same truth. We are temporary together. Imagine holding that awareness as you move through the world. Every stranger becomes a companion in transience. Every argument softens under the recognition that both sides are fleeting. The small cruelties of impatience, pride, or resentment begin to lose their power because they demand a permanence that doesn't exist. Death teaches perspective. Not in theory, but in feeling. It levels every hierarchy, equalizes every story. No matter how different our paths, they all end in the same mystery. And in that sameness, empathy grows like moss on the stone of existence. Grief is the purest form of that empathy. It is the heart's way of saying, I understood how precious you were only when you were gone. But grief, too, is a teacher. It strips away everything unnecessary. In its silence, we learn that love was never about possession, it was about recognition. To grieve is to continue loving in absence, to keep the thread of connection, even when the fabric has unraveled. Death teaches us this continuity, not as comfort, but as truth. Those we lose do not vanish, they change form, inhabiting our gestures, our memories, our ways of being. The compassion we show others often carries their echo. There is a certain gentleness that comes from understanding mortality, a kind of wisdom that cannot be taught by knowledge alone. It is the wisdom of holding back a harsh word, of noticing, the way sunlight touches a face, of realizing that every goodbye could be the last, and treating it accordingly. When we internalize this awareness, life slows down. We stop racing through it as if speed could save us from the end. We begin to savor. The present becomes enough. Even the sciences, in their precision, have found ways of echoing this humility. When astronomers describe the life cycle of stars, they often speak with reverence, as though describing living things. A star's death, they remind us, is not destruction, but renewal. Its collapse is what gives birth to the elements that make planets, oceans, and us. Every breath you take contains atoms forged in ancient supernovae. To understand that is to feel an unexpected kinship with the cosmos. To see that death, even there, is not an end, but a transformation. That same pattern runs through our small lives, endings feeding beginnings, grief turning into care, absence deepening love. In a way, death teaches us how to belong. It removes the illusion that we are separate from the rest of nature. Every leaf that falls, every wave that breaks, every life that ends, participates in the same cycle. Mortality is not something that happens to us. It is something we share with everything that lives. To accept that is to dissolve the barrier between self and world. Compassion, then, is not moral obligation, it is recognition. We are all, every one of us, made of the same temporary light. When we see through that lens, the scale of our worries shifts. The grievances that once consumed us begin to fade into proportion. The future loses some of its anxiety because we understand it will unfold with or without our control. The past loses some of its weight because we see that no mistake, no pain, no triumph can escape the larger cycle of change. Death reframes everything, not by erasing meaning, but by grounding it. Life becomes not a project to complete, but an experience to witness, moment by moment. Perhaps this is why the awareness of death so often awakens creativity. When we realize that time is limited, we begin to translate our feelings into form: art, music, words, gestures, stories. These creations are not attempts to escape death, but to honor it. They say, I was here and I saw beauty. They are acts of gratitude written in the language of impermanence. Through them, death becomes part of the creative process. The silent collaborator that reminds us to finish the sentence, to say what must be said before silence returns. Even forgiveness, the most difficult compassion, grows from this soil. To forgive is to recognize that life is too short to remain hard. It is to remember that everyone is living toward their own end, carrying unseen burdens, fears, and regrets. Death exposes the fragility behind every human mask. When you understand that the person who hurt you will also die, and that you will too, anger begins to lose its necessity. Forgiveness, then, is not weakness. It is wisdom learned from the inevitability of loss. There is an old saying, "To understand death is to live twice, once in the illusion of endlessness and again in the truth of limits." The second life is quieter, kinder, more awake. You stop trying to conquer time and instead learn to move with it. You speak more gently. You listen more deeply. You notice the small, miraculous details, the warmth of another hand, the way rain sounds on different roofs, the way night settles over cities and forests alike. Each of these becomes an affirmation. We are here for now, and that is enough. So death, the silent teacher, is not cruel. It is precise. It shows us what to keep and what to release. It teaches that love is urgent, that forgiveness is possible, and that the measure of a life is not in its length, but in its tenderness. To fear death is natural. To learn from it is transformation. Every time we choose compassion over indifference, understanding over judgment, presence over distraction, we are, in some quiet way, honoring death's lesson. And perhaps and this is the most generous truth of all, that death, though it takes, also gives. It gives depth to joy, weight to kindness, and urgency to connection. It turns the fleeting into the sacred. Through its mirror, we see ourselves not as endless beings to be preserved, but as fragile lights meant to warm the darkness for a little while. And in that realization, fear softens into gratitude. Life, seen through death's eyes, becomes not a race against time, but an act of love within it. The universe, at its most fundamental level, is a story of release. Stars, atoms, living things, all of them are engaged in the same quiet practice, letting go. Not in surrender or defeat, but in transformation. The light that reaches your eyes tonight began as collapse. The death of a star whose atoms scattered into space, cooling, drifting, recombining. Out of that letting go came everything, the planets, the oceans, the cells of your body. The universe does not cling. It changes endlessly, gracefully, inevitably. This is the physics of letting go, the law that threads through existence like gravity itself. In scientific language, we call it entropy, the gradual movement from order to disorder, from structure to dissolution. But disorder is not destruction. It is diffusion. Energy spreads, matter rearranges, patterns dissolve only to reappear in new forms. A broken wave is not lost. It has become the sea again. The same is true of you. Every cell that dies in your body, every breath that leaves your lungs, is part of this ceaseless exchange. Nothing truly disappears. It only changes state. Imagine for a moment the core of a dying star. Its fuel exhausted, it begins to contract under its own gravity, the atoms crushed together with unimaginable force. Then, in one brilliant instant, the star releases everything, its heat, its light, its elements, into the void. That explosion, a supernova, scatters carbon, oxygen, iron, and gold into space. Those fragments drift for millions of years, coalescing again into clouds, planets, and living things. You are made of that scattering. The calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, the carbon that holds your shape, all of it was forged in the furnace of a star that died long before Earth was born. You are living proof that endings are fertile. Entropy is often described as a tendency toward chaos, but it might be more accurate to think of it as a spreading of possibility. Energy, when concentrated, burns fast and dies. When released, it nourishes the universe. The same is true of emotion, of attachment, of life itself. To hold too tightly is to exhaust. To let go is to sustain. The stars have always known this. Their brilliance depends on release. Every flicker of starlight that reaches you is an act of cosmic exhalation. In biological terms, the same pattern repeats. Decay, far from being failure, is the foundation of renewal. When a forest burns, its ashes feed the soil. When a body dies, its elements return to the cycle, nourishing what grows next. In the language of physics, matter cannot be destroyed or only rearranged. The self you call you is not a fixed thing, but a temporary pattern in motion, an elegant configuration of ancient particles. Even your thoughts are chemical dances born from the same elements that once blazed in stars. When you die, those atoms will disperse, waiting for their next arrangement. Perhaps a blade of grass, a drop of water, a newborn star. The comfort in this is not metaphorical. It is literal. Science confirms what philosophy intuits. You are inseparable from the universe. The matter that composes you has existed since the beginning of time and will persist long after you dissolve. Death, from this perspective, is not an ending but a redistribution, the return of borrowed particles. The self loosens and the world continues, breathing you back into its pattern. This law, this rhythm of release and renewal, is what keeps the cosmos alive. Without decay, there would be no growth. Without entropy, no evolution. Complexity arises from the interplay between order and disorder, birth and dissolution. Even galaxies follow this rhythm. The Milky Way, now serene in its spiral, was once two smaller galaxies colliding, merging, becoming something new. The universe expands because energy flows outward, seeking balance. It is, in essence, the same process that makes us learn to let go, the movement from tension to equilibrium. And so, when we face our own mortality, science invites us to see it not as erasure, but as participation. You do not vanish, you change roles. The consciousness you know will fade, but the atoms will remain, entering new constellations of being. Your body is already a story of cycles. The air you exhale tonight may enter the lungs of a tree tomorrow. The carbon you release may feed a field of grass. The water in your veins may someday return as rain. The physics of letting go is not loss, it is continuity. Philosophers have often spoken of death as a mystery that resists explanation, but perhaps part of its mystery lies in its familiarity. Every day, on a smaller scale, we practice it. You shed cells, ideas, identities. The person you were 10 years ago no longer exists, yet you do not mourn them. You have become someone else, not because you resisted change, but because you allowed it. Life is a succession of micro-deaths, each one making room for growth. The body accepts this without fear. The mind, however, clings. It names these transitions and calls them endings. But physics tells a gentler story. Letting go is not the collapse of form, but the restoration of flow. In thermodynamics, systems left alone tend toward equilibrium, a state of balance where energy is evenly distributed. The same balance is what we feel when we finally stop resisting impermanence. We call it peace. To let go is to return to that equilibrium, to stop holding energy in one form and allow it to circulate freely again. In that sense, death is not disorder. It is the deepest kind of balance. There is beauty in knowing that even the most transient things leave echoes. Light from stars that died billions of years ago is still crossing space, arriving now at the eyes of someone who will never know their names. You are witnessing ghosts of light, radiant proof that release does not mean disappearance. What fades in one frame persists in another. In this universe, nothing truly ends. It only moves. And so when we think of our own endings, we might imagine them not as vanishing points, but as transformations in scale. Consciousness fades, but matter endures. Identity dissolves, but energy remains. You return to the same process that made you. The stars, the soil, the sea, they are all waiting to receive you. The physics of letting go is not cruel. It is generous. It takes what has served its moment and reassigns it to a new purpose. It turns every end into a beginning written in a different language. If this sounds spiritual, it is only because science, when followed far enough, begins to resemble awe. Study entropy is to see beauty in impermanence. To understand decay is to understand continuity. The universe does not grieve what it releases. It celebrates transformation. Each collapse, each scattering, each surrender is part of its creativity. Even the death of the sun far in the future will scatter light and matter that may one day form new worlds. Letting go is how the cosmos learns to keep going. You are part of that same rhythm. Every time you forgive, you practice entropy of the heart, the release of stored tension into peace. Every time you grieve, you practice reorganization. Love finding a new configuration after loss. Every breath, every exhale is a microcosm of the cosmic process. Intake, transformation, release. Life is not sustained by what it holds, but by what it gives back. So when the time comes to let go of moments, of people, of self, remember that you are not falling out of the universe. You are falling deeper into it. Your atoms will wander through clouds and rivers and stars, continuing the work of creation. You will not watch this happen, but it will happen nonetheless. You are not lost in death. You are distributed. You are returned to the same equation that began everything, energy transforming endlessly without remorse. The stars have already shown you how to do it. They have practiced letting go for billions of years, scattering their hearts across the cosmos until they became us. And someday, we will do the same, releasing our light so that something else might begin.
That is not tragedy.
It is symmetry. It is the most elegant physics of all. There is a point where words fall away, where thought itself begins to dissolve back into the stillness from which it came. The journey ends here, not in conclusion, but in quiet continuation. The same silence that opened the first chapter now returns, fuller, softer, carrying the echoes of everything we have touched along the way. What began as a question, what is death, has unfolded into a horizon so wide that the question itself no longer seeks an answer. It only listens. Perhaps that is what philosophy has been trying to teach us all along, that not every truth needs to be solved. Some truths are meant to be felt, vast, ungraspable, yet deeply intimate. Death, the oldest mystery, resists explanation, not because it hides from us, but because we are part of it. We cannot step outside of existence to observe its boundaries. We are the boundary, the brief shimmer between before and after. In the chapters before, we explored how death shapes meaning, how finitude deepens love, how science mirrors philosophy in its reverence for transformation. Now all of that converges into one quiet realization. Life and death are not opposites. They are two ways the universe knows itself. What we call death is not a rupture in being, but a shift in rhythm, a movement from one form of awareness to another form of belonging. The self dissolves, but existence continues. The current changes, but the ocean remains. In the language of physics, there are no true endings, only transitions. Energy flows from one configuration to the next, guided by laws that neither hurry nor grieve. The atoms that compose you now have been the breath of trees, the bones of mountains, the heart of stars. They will continue their journey long after the consciousness that binds them fades.
That is not loss.
It is participation. You are not leaving the universe. You are returning to it. And yet there is a tenderness in the human need to hold on, to remember, to name, to continue beyond dissolution. It is a beautiful impulse born of love. It is why we build, why we write, why we whisper the names of those who have gone before us. We keep their stories alive, not to defy death, but to weave it into continuity. Every memory is a form of reincarnation. Every act of remembrance says, you are still here, in me, in us, in everything that remains. Science calls it conservation. Philosophy calls it eternity. Faith calls it spirit. But beneath the words, the pattern is the same. The recognition that being never truly disappears. We return again and again through matter, through memory, through meaning. Perhaps the afterlife is not a place but a process, the slow recycling of energy and intention into new forms of experience. In that sense, life is already eternal. It is the movement of awareness through the infinite dance of change. Close your eyes for a moment.
And imagine the great cycle of things, the stars collapsing.
The galaxies drifting apart, the long night of space shimmering with ancient light. Somewhere within that immensity, a planet turns, and on it, small, fragile beings wonder about their endings. They build stories, write music, create meaning, and in doing so, they participate in the same creative impulse that once ignited the stars. Life and death are not separate events. They are phases in the same cosmic rhythm. Each breath you take is both an intake and a release, a birth and a death, a reminder that existence depends on both directions of flow. Perhaps this is why silence feels sacred. It is the sound of everything in balance. The inhale and exhale of the universe meeting in stillness. Death may be that stillness, not absence but equilibrium.
Not the negation of life, but its completion.
To die is to rejoin the quiet continuum, to become the background hum from which all things arise, and to which all things return. And still, we resist. The mind cannot help but ask, what comes next? It reaches beyond knowing, as it always has, searching for the shape of the unknown. Religion offers heavens, philosophy offers metaphors, science offers cycles. But maybe the most honest answer is the gentlest one. We do not know.
And maybe we do not need to. Not knowing is not emptiness.
It is openness. It is the permission to rest within the mystery without trying to conquer it. The Greek philosopher Socrates, before drinking the hemlock, said that death might be the greatest blessing of all. Either a dreamless sleep or a new kind of awakening. Both, he said, would be good. There is peace in that simplicity. To imagine death not as punishment but as rest is to dissolve the tension between fear and faith. We do not need to decide what lies beyond. We need only to recognize that whatever it is, we are already part of it. When the heart stops, the atoms remain. When the brain falls silent, the energy it once used disperses into the world. When the story ends, the paper is still there, ready for another to begin. The universe wastes nothing. Even loss is recycled. The tears shed in grief contain the same salt as the sea, the same chemical memory that binds all living things. Through every end, the continuum hums quietly beneath. And so perhaps death is not the closing of a door, but the widening of a room. Consciousness, released from the boundaries of body and self, might simply merge into the vast awareness of the universe, not as identity, but as presence. You would not see it because there would be no you left to see.
You would be it. The silence, the space, the glow of the stars.
And in that great dissolving there might be no fear at all, only belonging. There is a deep comfort in realizing that everything you have ever been part of still exists in some form. The people you loved continue in the gestures you learned from them, in the warmth they gave that you now give to others. The air you breathe carries molecules from ancient forests and forgotten seas. The light that reaches you tonight began its journey before your species existed. To live is to be surrounded by ghosts of persistence, by echoes of everything that has ever been. And to die is to become one of those echoes. Soft, invisible, eternal in effect, if not in name. Maybe this is what meaning truly is. Not permanence, but participation. You are part of the continuum, both fleeting and infinite. Every heartbeat, every kindness, every breath is a collaboration with time. When it ends, it does not stop. It simply changes key, becoming part of the larger harmony. You may never hear that final chord, but it will play nonetheless,
resonating through the cosmos long after you have gone. And now, as we reach the end of this quiet journey,
let us return to where we began, to that first whisper in the darkness. Death stands as the only universal human experience that no living person has ever truly experienced. We began by standing before that paradox, afraid and curious, gazing into the unknown. But somewhere along the way, the question changed. We discovered that to think about death is to think about life, that the two are threads of the same tapestry, woven together so tightly that they cannot be separated. We began by fearing the silence. We end by listening to it. To you who have listened, thank you for walking through this landscape of thought and feeling, for allowing the stillness between the words to speak as loudly as the words themselves. This journey, like every life, has been finite, but within it, I hope you felt the sense of something infinite, the continuity that runs beneath beginnings and endings alike. You are part of that continuity. You always have been. You always will be. If you've found peace here, if some part of this journey has quieted a corner of your mind, you're welcome to stay connected. Gently, without pressure, let your curiosity drift further. Like and subscribe if you wish, so that we may continue to explore together the soft science of existence, the calm wonder of knowing and not knowing. Thank you to those who already walk with us, whose presence and patience have built this small constellation of calm among the noise. And as this chapter fades into silence, remember, death is not the opposite of life, but its quiet continuation. Everything ends, yes, but everything also becomes something else. The voice fades, but the resonance remains. The light dims, but its photons keep traveling. Even when no one is left to see them, they continue through the dark, carrying the memory of the moment they began. Perhaps that is what we are too, the brief illuminations in the long night, still moving long after we are gone. So rest now beneath that vast, unbroken stillness. Feel the continuity that hums beneath every breath. You are part of it. The quiet continuum, the gentle unfolding, the soft eternity that needs no name. The story does not end. It only changes tone, turning into silence, turning into light. Good night.